The sun has left and forgotten me. It's dark, I cannot see.
Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief storymaker at Elkins Consulting. Whether you're sharing business stories or personal stories, how you share them matters. The way that you share a story can change the way people perceive you, and they definitely can change your internal dialogue about things that have happened and things that are likely to happen in the future. Today's episode features Hope Marshall, and we met through a mutual friend, Peter Davis, who has Heroes Quest Consulting and is also a powerful storyteller. So thanks to Peter for the introduction. I am so glad to introduce Hope Marshall to my listeners. And just so you are listening, friends, as you hear our stories being shared, I want you to be thinking about your own stories that are related to the stories you're hearing and add them to a collection of stories so you have them ready for your next interview, podcast interview, or even a networking event when you have an opportunity to demonstrate who you are and what matters to you. And just a quick reminder, my course on Udemy is called Job Interview Storytelling, and it helps you from start to finish prepare for your next interview. You can find the information at elkinsconsulting.com. Hope, thank you so much for joining me today. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure. And anyone who can see the beauty in the words that Peter Davis shares, I know is going to add value to our listeners' lives as they hear this episode. And you probably know this because you listened to a couple episodes. I love to begin by inviting you to share something about yourself that most people might not know about you. Something that maybe from your past or something even a current hobby that you don't share on LinkedIn that's not in your bio or your resume. What do you think? Do you have something you can share with us?
Yes, I would say I am a accidental crafter. So I make button earrings. So what I'll do is take the actual button machine, where you press down and everything, but instead of the plastic and the paper, I use fabric. And so I'll cut out the fabric in a circle and then, press it down. And so I have like all these earrings. And I think we were talking about this earlier where there's all these like unfinished projects that I am guilty of that as well. So the button maker is now on the top shelf in the closet, but I have all these earrings that I had intended, to sell and, to set up a table at like a farmer's market, and it just never happened. But that's that's my one thing is, I'm kind of like a Jane of some trades, not all trades, just some.
I love that. And it doesn't surprise me. I love that you shared that because I think there are a lot of us out there that try a lot of different things and we feel some guilt or a little shame about leaving them behind and having the evidence of our giving up too soon, maybe, or just losing track of it, moving on with our lives. But really, there's so many of us that do that. And I remember recently hearing somebody say, well, that's part of what makes people interesting is when they try a bunch of different things that they don't necessarily have to be good at, but they're just trying different things, finding things that they enjoy. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
So I kind of knew that you would have that creative streak from your profile on LinkedIn, even though it doesn't say it in those words. I could tell by the way you describe the work that you do. So I would love for you to share with our listeners a recent experience at work that you walked away from thinking, oh, yeah, I'm really good at this. I love what I do.
Oh, wow. So actually, we were also talking about this a little earlier. So we have this training at work. It's a 2-day leadership development training. So I primarily work with the Homeland Security, and most of them are, senior executive level, or at the very least, GS 15, what have you, 14, 15. And so,
Yeah, pretty high level.
yeah, they're a hard group, they're a tough crowd. And so,
Yes.
so there is this like project management ideology called the four disciplines of execution. And when I first facilitated it, I didn't get it. I didn't understand it. It didn't make sense to me. What is a lead measure? What's a lag? What's a wig? What is this? You know, but now I understand it. And so a new person facilitated it and said that, oh wow, I didn't understand this. So we recently got a new trainer or instructor on our team. And so now we're having to kind of, pass the torch so that she can get familiar with the material. And when I realized I got it was when she came to me and said, I didn't explain it well. And I was like, well, let's talk about it. And I broke it down in digestible steps. And I was like, okay, here's your wig. Let's say you have one wildly important goal, one thing you want to do. Your lead measures are all the activities that you'll do to achieve the wig. And then your lag measures, they're the outcomes. So let's say you want to plan a vacation. That's your wildly important goal. What are some lead measures? Okay, well, you can start saving money. That's something you can control. You can start researching things to do at your destination. That's something you can control. And the final thing is the lag measure, which is you'll wind up at whatever destination you want to go to. I was like, just as it applies in the workplace, how you set goals and you designate what activities you're going to do to work on the goals, you do the same thing in your personal life. And she was like, that makes so much sense. Thank you. Thank you. And as I'm telling her, that's when I felt like, oh, wow, I really do get this stuff.
Oh, that is the
So,
best feeling. Oh my gosh, isn't that funny? So you noticed afterward, of course, it's always looking back, right? That you go,
yes,
oh, that's
yes.
what that was. Oh, that's the best. And did you get feedback from her later when she had worked with the group that you were training or that she
Well,
was training?
she had come to me after she worked with the group, after she
Okay.
had facilitated the training,
Mhm.
and was like, oh, it didn't go over well. And I was like, well, which part? And that's when she said, that wig stuff, the four disciplines of execution, and that's when we talked about the wig. Because
Right.
it is a tough, dense topic to get through. And if you don't understand it well enough, you will confuse your audience,
Of course.
And so I was like, if you can just put it in a context that you understand, like how you plan a goal for your household,
Mhm.
for your husband and your son. You said you went to Paris last year. How did you plan that? You, and she was like, oh, I get it. I get it now. I get it now. And I was like, and then the better you understand it, the more you can add like anecdotal information to help like foster up what's also,
Right.
in the facilitator guide. Because we go by a guide, we don't read it verbatim, but it kind of helps you to stay on track, to manage
Mhm.
your time, and understand like the material. So
Right. Well,
y-
yes, having that structure helps us keep on task too. I
yes.
know sometimes, and I am the worst about structure, going off script. So as you can imagine, I love that story for a couple of reasons because we talked earlier about StrengthsFinder and that you use that tool as part of this training. And what I'm hearing in your voice versus developer, this idea that you want people to be their best and you can see instantly what somebody who is underperforming or in her case she was unsure of herself. It wasn't so much that she was underperforming. And you can touch and feel what her future vision could look like, how she could be at a 7 or an 8 on a scale of 1 to 10. She's at a 2 or a 3 now, or 4. I know exactly what that would look like as an 8. And you love to celebrate and acknowledge incremental improvement, being able to be that cheerleader to say, look how much better you did this next time. Think about even the next time you do it, it's going to be even better. That kind of encouragement, that's what I was hearing in your story.
Yeah, and sometimes I feel like I like for people to find their own answers. So
Hmm.
I'll try to refer back to something they said to me before. Like she had shared that her family, they went to Paris
Hmm.
for a family vacation. And I was like, okay, well, that probably was a big goal for the family. It probably took a lot of moving parts, a lot of planning. You got to get the budget together. You got to, coordinate a PTO with you and with your husband, and then try to coordinate. Okay, we got to do this around a holiday where our son isn't missing too many days of school, and
Right,
so I was like, those are all lead measures. Those are all things and actions that you have to take so that you can meet the goal. And just
right.
kind of seeing the light bulb go off, it's like you
Hmm.
understand this stuff because I don't like
Yeah,
to tell people what to do. There's a quote that says most often people need to be reminded than needing to be instructed.
right,
So
right.
they
Because they
already,
know. They
yeah.
just, yeah. And having an analogy like that just makes so much sense
Hmm.
to be able to associate it with something that somebody already knows. That's what you said at the very beginning of the story. If you can associate it with something they already know, and I love that you picked up on something you knew about her so that you knew it was going to be meaningful to her. So that's
Yeah.
cool too.
Hmm.
Wow. I love that. So, one of the questions I've been thinking about asking, and I'm going to experiment with you, is so I've had some oops situations with my clients where I realized that that didn't go as well as I wanted it to go. And one of the things that I'm getting better at now in my 50s is being able to acknowledge it, figure out what went wrong, figure out maybe what I could do it differently next time. And to some extent, obviously, we hold on to things a long time, but to some extent, I'm able to then let go. And one thing that happened a couple of years ago, I was working with a coaching client and I woken up with a headache and I didn't reschedule the appointment. I just thought, I'm just going to power through this. I know he really wanted this appointment and he has this stuff coming up. So I'm just going to power through it. And the whole time I could feel this pain behind my eyes. And I felt like I was contradicting him. Like he would make a comment, and instead of asking a question to help him come to some clarity or even offering something that could help some clarity, I was in this weird, when you're in pain, your brain is just not functioning properly. And the whole
Hmm.
conversation, when it ended, I hung up the phone or closed up Zoom, and I remember this kind of sickening feeling in my stomach. Like that did not go well. That was, and I love my clients. And I was thinking, why didn't I just reschedule? He would have understood that. And instead, I just had this really not pleasant ending to a conversation. And I will never forget it because I texted him about 2 hours later after I had taken a nap. I had taken some ibuprofen and Excedrin and whatever to try to at least reduce the pain. I had taken a little
Hmm.
nap and I texted him, hey, I just got up from a nap because I woke up with this migraine and I should have rescheduled. And I am sorry for how that went. Can we reschedule? And I'm not going you're not going to pay for that session because it was not handled the way that I want to handle it. So can we
Hmm.
reschedule? Do you have any time on whatever, 2 days later? And he wrote back, I was just in the middle of a text saying that I didn't think that went very well. Are you okay?
Oh.
because you didn't seem like yourself. And it was that moment of, okay, I just learned a really powerful lesson. First of all, about apology and how important that is. And second of all, when you are in pain, don't try to be fully present with somebody that you need to be fully present with. Reschedule. At
Yeah.
least give them a heads up, right? So I learned this painful lesson. And then when we had our next session, it was wonderful. And it was so important to me to learn that lesson. It was painful. It was an awful lesson to learn because I care so deeply for this person. And I felt like I hurt him. I know, isn't that awful? And yet, to this day, we are still good friends. He has brought me into work with his team after I
Mhm.
worked with him. He's a wonderful sounding board for stuff going on in business. But anyway, enough about me.
Oh,
I would
wow.
like to
That's
hear your story where you had that moment where you had to learn that lesson and then move forward from it.
Oh, wow. Because as you were talking, I was kind of thinking, this one is like not work related, but it's with a friend.
Mhm.
Um, and he had gotten married, and he was like an old Navy buddy, and he lived in DC at the time, and so we would hang out all the time. And then he got into a relationship, and then it was like the three of us because
Mhm.
I got along really well with his partner. And so then we would have like brunch on our own. He's like, "Hey, meet me for coffee." So then we developed our own friendship, and then they moved to Waldorf, which, if you're from the DC metro region, it's a running joke that Waldorf, you need to pack a bag and stay there because it's
Right.
so far. It's not that
It's not
far,
really. But yeah,
but
with the traffic in that area, though, it can take hours. Yes.
right. And so um he was having like a Christmas dinner at his house there. And I don't know, I was feeling a bit scared that I was losing my friend because by this time we had started to hang out less and less.
Mhm.
And instead, I made it about him, and I was like, "Oh, um, you're not being a good friend to me," and blah, blah, blah. And then we stopped speaking.
Uh,
And then his partner reached out maybe some months later and was like, "Are you just kind of done with us, or like what happened? So are you done? You don't want to be friends anymore?" And then I was like, "Well, no, I just thought, you guys didn't want to be friends anymore." So then I actually spoke to my friend and admitted, like, "Well, I probably did not behave in the best way, and because I didn't see how I fit into your life anymore.
mm,
And I was afraid that I was going to lose my friend, you know,
mhm.
and I should have just maybe said that instead of trying to make it like about you. And then come to find out he had like a car accident. He had gotten into a really bad
Oh,
car accident. So he was scared to be on the road. Um, And
right.
so whenever I would say, "Well, hey, are you guys coming into the district? I'll meet you somewhere. Do you guys want to meet?" And it was always no. No, no. It's like, dang,
I
they
guess
didn't
they
so
don't want
like,
to hang out with me.
yeah.
Right.
But then when we had like the heart to heart, it's just like, "Oh, well, I just was a little scared because I didn't know, friendships do change when people get married and they kind of
Right.
get started on that part of their life, and sometimes you may not fit." And so we actually don't talk anymore. But at least this time it's not anger. It's from a
Right.
place of, well, we had a great season of life. You know,
Right.
we were in the military together, and we hung out even outside of the military. Like after he had gotten out, I got out,
Mhm.
and we were really good friends then. And then, he got on. He always wanted to, be married. He always wanted a house and all that. So once his chance came,
You took
It's
it.
like, okay, sometimes your season is up with people
Hmm.
and it can be, you know, you just have to accept that. And it's not bad blood. It's not, they're not being mean to you.
Right.
Maybe you met the need that, and that's it. So that, I mean, that was
Hmm.
sad because, sometimes I was like, oh, I miss my friend because we would have like silly jokes you know,
Right.
and just remembering like funny stuff that he would do. Like one time he lost his keys and he had to climb. He lived in a row house in DC. If you if you see how the row houses are, they have
Yeah.
those columns and then there's a porch and then there's the windows.
Hmm.
He had to climb up the column and then come through the window because he's like, I can't find my keys. And I'm like, what are you doing? So just silly things when we look back.
Yeah.
And he was like, that was really stupid. Like, I should have just called a locksmith. He's like, I didn't want to wait. So,
That is so funny.
yeah,
I think so many people can relate to that. The pain of creating a story in our heads about what's happening
yeah,
instead of just using our words.
yep,
And all of us have patterns of that in our past where we didn't just use our words. And so many times, you're right. There are some relationships that are they just phase out, right? You outgrow each other and or growing from different places and changing the way that you're living your life. And that's totally natural. And we feel some grief for it. But what I love about the story is finally using your words and him using his words and saying, it's not that I don't want to spend time with you anymore. It's that this is what's happening in my life. And for you to trust and honor that. I mean, how many of us could have relieved so much anger and tension if we had just used our words and asked the question and then believed them when we got an answer? Because
yeah,
that's the other side of it. Do we believe them and just take it for exactly what they say? Oh my gosh. I think of it's like all of my 30s.
yeah.
My that whole decade was filled with that kind of misunderstanding without using our
Mine
words.
too. Gosh.
Yeah,
Yeah,
30s are hard for that because we're kind of finding our way and getting more comfortable in our skin, and yet we forget just to ask the question instead of making up a story about what's happening.
right, right. And I think
Yeah.
I've also learned that, and some of that I'm learning comes from a little bit of being a little bit self-absorbed, and that you think everything is about you. But the older you get, you realize people are not really thinking about you as much as you think. They're not sitting around like, I really want to figure out how to hurt this person.
Right.
They're not, some people are if they're crazy,
Yeah,
but
it's pretty rare
um,
though.
yeah, but most people are just trying to get through their own lives, meet their own personal goals. And sometimes we're a part of that, and sometimes we're a priority, and sometimes we're not. But either way, it has nothing to do, with us. And, when people in people's growth, sometimes you're just not part of their journey. Because we always talk
Right.
about, oh, I cut this person off and I cut that person off. But sometimes we're the anchor in people's lives. Sometimes we're the
Mhm.
ones that people have to cut off, because they're like,
Right.
okay, you're here and I love you, but I gotta let you go. And sometimes we're that
Yeah.
person for other people. And I know looking back, there have been a few of my friendships where I was like, yeah, I probably was, the wet blanket in that friendship, and I got
Oh,
cut loose and
yeah.
I should have gotten cut loose, you know.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I have three different people in my head like that where I get it. You know, it's, and it wasn't malicious. It wasn't like ghosting. It was just spending less time and then not reaching out and then really not reaching out and then
Yeah,
periodically
not being
checking in.
invited.
Right?
Yep, not being
Yeah.
invited to stuff. You'd
Right.
see things on Facebook like, wow, They
I
didn't
would have
invite
liked
me.
to that. You're right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And then
Yeah.
they're not calling, they're not inviting you. And then you're just like, oh, okay, well, I have to accept that
Mhm.
they don't want to be friends with me anymore, you know.
Right. And it's funny you just said that because I think more than in any other decade, our 50s are when we start to see it for that, as opposed to our 40s when we feel the grief of it. 50s, we feel the grief, but we get it differently. And the reason that popped into my head is I was thinking about how one of my friends was struggling with a relationship that she had had for a really long time. And her husband said, "Why are you chasing her? You have these other people in your life who love spending time with you, who you say you want to spend more time with, but you're chasing this one who's not engaging with you, who's not participating in it. Why?" And when he said that, that was probably, I don't know, 6 or 8 years ago. I was probably in my late 40s when I heard that story. And from that point on, it was like a light switch had changed. I realized, no, I don't believe in a on-off switch in our brains. I just don't. I believe everything's on a dimmer switch, that we slowly
Mm,
start
I
perceiving
like that.
things
Mhm.
subconsciously, right? And then all of a sudden, the light comes up. It's been niggling in your head for a while, right? But then all of a sudden something triggers that, oh, that's what that is. And that was my
Yeah.
moment for it. And I'll never forget it because now when I'm putting more effort into something without feeling that reciprocation of effort and energy and love, I stop. I
Yeah.
just stop now.
Yeah.
Ah, I love this conversation.
Hmm.
So, Hope, before we wrap up, I would love to hear something about your story, something that happened in your life that brought you to where you are now, because you've been through a lot, a
Hmm.
lot. I mean, as soon as I saw your LinkedIn profile, I thought, oh, I got to get this woman on the podcast. And now our listeners understand your depth. They understand what you're really good at. They understand and already love how you approach that self-reflection. I know I do. So I want to hear something, a story that led you to where you are now, that you really, when you think back, now you can see it for what it was.
Oh, wow. I always tell so I have some like social media friends that we have since begun to speak over the phone,
Mhm.
and even met in person. And one lady in particular, we talk often, and I always say that I derailed my life by about 15 years. Where I am now is where I should have been 15 years ago. So I don't have a lot of regrets, but the regrets that I do have largely contributed to my derailing my own life. So I stayed in nonprofit jobs much longer than I should have. I never made any money. Um, and there is how do I say this nicely? There's a self-righteousness that comes with poverty. When you work in certain jobs and you don't make a lot of money, you get self-righteous with people who do make a lot of money. And you're just like, well, I'm better than you because I'm working for the people. I'm helping people, I'm
Mhm.
changing lives, and I don't care about money, but I could never save anything, barely. I could never go on vacation. If I did go somewhere, it was like a bus trip, to Richmond or something like that, because that's all I could afford. I just never made any money. And then it kind of turns into deserving. You
Mhm.
think that's what you deserve. So that's where I stayed. Like, oh, well, you know, so I went through this whole process of, you tell yourself things. You're like, oh, well, I'll make do, you know, and I just got to a point where it's like, is this how I want to go into my 40s, am I going to be doing this in my 40s? And so I went on this like kind of 12-year course correction. So starting with AmeriCorps. So, because before AmeriCorps, I just had social service experience. So direct care, um, case management, that kind of rugged, you're always
Right.
going, you're working with clients, and some of them very dysfunctional. And I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm tired of being broke. I'm tired of this career path. I don't know what else there is out there, but it's got to be better than this. And then I joined AmeriCorps, and I was doing a veteran career management program. So that sparked an interest in workforce development, which I thought I would stay in. And then I worked a little bit still in nonprofit, in
It's hard to cut
career,
that cord.
right. In career, I was a career development specialist. That was the title. And I got completely disillusioned. And, I have some opinions about nonprofit, but I was like, we're not helping these people. We're just giving them just enough to kind of keep them in this cycle of poverty, this cycle of dysfunction. I want no more parts of this. I'm tired of not making any money, and I'm done. So that was 2015. And so then 2015, I got my official title as a training specialist. So then I transitioned into formally training, and that was with Department of Agriculture. So I was in federal service for about just under 6 years, and I haven't looked back. Each transition, I go up, there's a bump in pay, there's a bump in skill set, there's a bump in exposure, and I'm kind of doing things that I never thought I was smart enough to do. I never really thought I was that smart. I didn't think I was that like poised or articulate. And so I was just like, well, I'll just take what I can get. But but now I'm like, okay, I can do this. So you look back at the fruits of all your labor, and I still mourn the 15-year derailing that I did with my life. But I let myself grieve, and sometimes I'll even cry. Something will trigger me on TV, and then I'm like, oh, all that time I wasted, I can't get it back. And I admittedly, I'll cry about it sometimes, but what's different now is I let myself grieve the time wasted. And then it's like, okay, it's okay. We will make better decisions going forward. We'll just continue to make better decisions. And so that's what I tell myself, like, you'll just get better and better. And now I'm a contractor, which I never thought I would be, because I thought contractors were like super wealthy and super smart and all this stuff, and glamorous, because I would see the contractors when I was working, as a federal
Right.
civil servant.
Trainer.
And, they would make like a ton of money. There was all this rumors like, oh, they get paid all this money and blah, blah, blah. And, and now I'm on the other side, you know.
Uh-huh.
I'm on the other side of, contracting. And at first it was all this like, oh, you need the federal job, you need the stability, But now it's like, well, yeah, this contract is 5 years. The contract I had before was 1 year. But I'm like, you create your own stability by being good with your money. You're getting paid a good salary. And you create stability by creating a nest egg, by developing relationships, by being very good at your job, so that if another contract comes available, they'll say, okay, we're putting you on that contract,
Exactly. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
Yeah, that
you add value everywhere you go and your name
exactly.
becomes memorable. Yes.
Yeah.
There are so many things about your story that are resonating with me. One thing that immediately popped into my head, and I would love for you to consider this. When I was finally leaving my W-2 job, I've always had a side hustle. I've always worked multiple jobs because I get bored easily. And the only way I would stay in a job is if I had something else going on the side, even while we had little kids, like always something. And I remember it was toward the end of my W-2 job. I hadn't given my notice yet, but I was building my Elkins consulting. I'd had my No Longer Virtual conference. I was doing trainings and keynote presentations. And my friend, who was, I think she was about 68 at the time, came into my office where I was working, and we were talking about a nonprofit, a community organization that we were both on the board of. And I
Mhm.
said, I had just finished my first real keynote speaking engagement. And I had been flown to Ontario, California, and they put me up in this beautiful hotel. And I did my thing, and they came to talk to me after. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I so want to do more of this. And I got such great feedback. And I remember talking to her saying, I wish it hadn't taken me so long to get to this point. Like I could have been doing this 10 years ago if I had just known. And you know what she said to me? She said, you wouldn't have been as good at it if you had started it 10 years ago. Your path still would have been this long to get to this point, but your
Mhm.
path is exactly what it was supposed to be, because that's what makes you who you are, and what you're good at now was the path you took. You're
Mhm.
never on the wrong path.
And it's funny that you talk about that because I was just telling someone, I was like, I would love to be a traveling training consultant because I like working. I like having, the W-2 because I like
Uh-huh.
having medical benefits.
Yes, of course.
But I found the happy medium is contracting because contracts end,
Exactly.
you know, and
That's
you
the
can,
adaptability talent.
yeah. So
Short term.
so I like the contract ending, but I would like to have that. I would like to be the person flown out. It's like, oh, she's giving a training on this
Mhm.
or, this specific, topic. So that's my next like hurdle to gather up the gumption and, the confidence for
All right,
that.
listeners. Listeners, you're on this. You're on this challenge, right? We're going to help Hope Marshall get to where she wants to be. Well, Hope, you're going to have to start sharing more about what that looks like for you. And over the next few weeks, few months, start writing down what are the topics you would want to train on. What would you want that to look like? Set it
Mhm.
up, make it happen, because your whole path is leading you to where you're going next, right?
Yeah, yeah. I've
Yeah.
started, I've started like the price points, and I have courses that I've actually made where I have a PowerPoint presentation. I have the
Mhm.
facilitator guide, I have the activity prompts and things. So I'm like, well, how am I gonna sell myself? I don't like being on social media. So that's just but
We will find a way.
I will get through it.
Yes, you will. You are determined. Hope, thank you so much for sharing your stories today. It has been just a pleasure getting to spend this time with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is so great. I was so looking forward to this. That's why, like I said, I put on my earrings and stuff. And
Listeners, you can't see this. Actually, I will take a screenshot of us and I'll send it to my assistant to include in the show notes. Are you ready for a quick smile?
okay.
All right. That way you can see her gorgeous copper earrings that her friend's mother made. They look like a hammered copper. They're just beautiful.
Thank you.
And yes, we will talk again sometime soon. Listeners, it's your turn. What part of your path are you thinking of in terms of regret that you can reframe to better understand that that part of your path is a big, important aspect of who you are today? And if you hadn't experienced exactly that path, you would not be the same person you are today, bringing the joy and the wisdom and the experience that you bring every single day now and into your future to wherever you sit. Listeners, I want to hear from you. Add a message or a comment onto the show notes on this podcast. Look up Hope Marshall on LinkedIn. The link will be in the show notes associated with this podcast at elkinsconsulting.com. Thanks for listening.
Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.